All right.
Welcome everybody to our Marriage Monday.
What's going on, everybody?
Well,
y'all should hear
just throw me off.
Y'all should hear Daniel loud and clear.
Let me know. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yeah.
All right. So welcome to Marriage Mondays with Living Well Today. We are your hosts over here on the West Coast, Daniel and Kendra, and our partners on the East Coast, Dennis and Angela Bullock. So our discussion tonight is what? Angie, what are we going to be talking about tonight?
We're going to be talking about my spouse has changed. What do I do now?
Uh-oh.
Yes, is for real.
All right.
But just, our last session that we did for prayer last week, we talked about that, and we just felt like a part 2 was needed because we didn't get a lot into it, and we just wanted to talk about it a little bit more. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds great. All right. So we can go ahead.
No, all I was going to say is like where we kind of ended off was talking about like the different, like accepting the change of your spouse and different things like that. And I think that's a big way to start.
All right. So you want to get us into it or?
Yeah. Let me go to my notes. So basically what we talked about last time is we talked about there are seasons of unrest and change and difficulty in marriage. And that honestly, I didn't give the number, but honestly, like different articles and different things say literally in the lifetime of a marriage, you could be married. I won't give the specific number to freak out people, but you could be married to several different people in the lifetime of your marriage. And why is that? Because seasons happen, life happens, health issues happen, parents die, losing jobs, kids go crazy. You could unfortunately have somebody in your marriage that, is not acting right, or you could have all kind of things that you are literally like the person I married, you like, Harpo, who's this woman? You know what I mean? Like, you're like, I don't know you. Who are you? And I think part of that too is, you know how you say like, we can't control life, but the only thing we can control is how we respond to life. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes in marriage, we don't always respond well. And then I think too, if it's something very traumatic, I have seen just grief alone, in my life and in my family's life, grief can change you alone if you don't process it and deal with it. So it could just be simply you have a lot of death happening in your family, or you've lost a parent. Or you unfortunately lost a child, and trauma can change you. Hurt and deep pain can change people. And how do you handle that in a marriage?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there's a couple of movies that I can't remember the name of the movie. One of them was Why Did I Get Married? So one of Tyler Perry's movies where I think Janet Jackson, and she was married to some
child. I don't know.
And anyway, the whole the relationship. The problem with the relationship was they had lost a child, and they couldn't really deal with that. Couldn't reconcile with each other over that. So they were totally two different people on the other side of that loss. And there was another movie, I can't remember what it is now, but I've watched a couple of movies where losing a child really affected the psyche and the heart of that couple. So that can definitely change. And the other thing I'm thinking about is, let's say you get married and one spouse is maybe not even saved. And then they actually change from being, a non-Christian to being a Christian. And so that's a whole change in the relationship that you positive change from my perspective, but the other spouse might be dealing with that.
Yeah. I think what's been amazing to me is culture in itself, how the influx of technology, our cell phones and everything like that, how much that plays a part in our relationships, and how people distance themselves from certain things because the distractions of this world. So, for example, meaning that culture, man, I feel like, man, people are just going through listening to all these types of things on the news. I mean, we just out here in Florida, we dealt with all these hurricanes and all that type of stuff. So you add in all that other stuff, that's what's going on in the world, and people bring it into their psyche, into their marriage. It's like, how do you deal with all that other type of stuff? Because you think about the COVID season really did a number on a lot of people, and it changed a lot of marriages, things. And so how we do relationships, even though it's the same, it's different. We was talking about how back when we was coming up, how we used to talk about, how we didn't really believe in people living together before they got married. And now we counsel from a standpoint where there's a lot of people who are doing it, and it's kind of like, I'm not backing away from it. I want to live with this person before we get married, and so you got to change your method a little bit differently and minister from that standpoint versus all this other type of stuff. And so when you're going through change, I see a lot of cultural changes that are infiltrating our relationships. That's, that people are making it, can make it or having a hard time trying to navigate all the stuff that's going around them, and then work on their own personal relationship.
That's really good, Dennis. Yeah, I agree. It is interesting how much our culture has shifted and changed, and things that have been normalized. And I was curious. I'm wondering from y'all's perspective. I mean, I was thinking about this from so many different angles, not just marriage and relationships, but I was thinking about how much our COVID really changed everything. It just, I don't know, it really changed so much. And one of the things that we all saw, the four of us saw as ministry wise, is how many couples struggled during COVID. I mean, and I'm still listening to people talk about things that during COVID came to light. Like, I just listened to a very well-known female preacher who pastors a church with her ex-husband now. And a lot of what came out in terms of them finalizing and getting divorced, it all really started to come to the surface during COVID. So I know it was happening before COVID started, but COVID just really was like a pressure cooker for some people's. I think it was a pressure cooker for everybody. But for some people, like, it burnt the meal up, right? It just burned it beyond recognition and repair. And then for other people, it, maybe it made it stronger. But what are your thoughts about how and why COVID changed everything for our relationships?
Can we say the C word without being suppressed on here?
I hope so. I didn't even think about that.
I think, again, when we're talking about culture and how we're able to see what's going on in another city with our phones, and to see what was happening back then, whether you saw, people passing, or even just the job market, the economy. You saw jobs go, hey, we're going virtual now. And so that took people away from the connections that they had with each other. And now I'm separated because you spend a lot of time at work with people, 8 hours, 40 hours a week. And so when you come home, it's like, okay, what do I have to talk about with my wife? I've been talking to my co-workers over here, and that's kind of my life over there.
The way I looked at it, it was all the distractions that kept you from, I don't like my spouse, or I don't like being married to you, were all stripped away. You know what I'm saying? We can't go on these vacations and go on a cruise anymore and just, I don't know. I always joke, Christians get drunk on vacation, right? So it's like, we can't just go and ignore this, or we can't go to the movies. We can't go to our friend's house. We can't just be busy with all this stuff. If I'm a shopper, I couldn't go to the mall. You know what I mean? Like, the things that I use to, what's the word I'm looking for?
Distract.
Distract, but now I'm looking for another word. Cope.
Okay. Yes.
But it is distractions, right? My
Mhm.
coping mechanisms, I couldn't
Mhm.
run to them. I couldn't run to, what I normally did.
Mhm.
Even if I wanted to get away from you, I couldn't go to work. You know what I mean? I had to work from
Yeah.
home. So now I'm with you all the time, and the things that we have probably been ignoring as a couple are
Mhm.
are not that ignorable anymore, if that's a
Right.
word.
Right.
Like
Right.
this. Everything that you was trying to hide, you have no more hiding places.
Yeah, all the
Yes.
high
Right
places
now,
got stripped.
you got to be at home with each other. You got to see each other. So
Yeah, so
That's the big question, though. And so, why during that time? Because the expectation in marriage, when you get married, is, hey, we're going to spend the rest of our lives together. So, spending more time together should result in more oneness, right?
right
More
versus
closeness.
yeah.
And what happened in a lot of relationships was the opposite.
Mhm.
Spending a lot of time together actually caused frustration and push people in opposite directions. So,
Well, you know what I heard. So there's this psychologist, a relationship expert that I really, really like a lot. And one of the things I've heard her talk about. She said, "This is one of the things about COVID. So life is too short. So people either decided life is too short to
Yeah.
keep living like this, or life is too long to keep living like this, right? Right?
to keep living like what?
Like, so whatever was causing strain or tension or stress on the marriage relationship, some people decided enough is enough. I'm done. So I still got too much life to live to keep, I've been in this relationship long enough. I'm moving on.
Okay.
Or my life is too short. So I'm not spending another
So is it maybe, now I'll let you talk, Angie. So is it maybe being being in front of each other 24/7 accelerated the
I think so.
the reality? Because if you go to work, then you spend a lot of time away from each other. So you're only spending maybe a couple of hours a day with each other.
Yeah.
So that prolongs your realization that this isn't what I want. Whereas when you are spending all this time together, now you're seeing, oh yeah, this ain't what I want.
Yeah.
And so it reduces the time for you to be able to make that decision.
Yeah. Think about I want all of us to think about what and you don't have to say what it is, but think about what is the most challenging relationship in your life right now. Like, who is that person that really like rubs you the wrong way? You always trying to like pray, speak the truth in love. Like you have to really press in to be.
It took me a minute.
With this person, right?
Okay.
Now you got that person in your mind. Dennis, you got somebody in your mind? Okay.
I know where you
now imagine you're married to them.
Yeah.
And now it's COVID. So
C word.
So it's like everything is heightened because first of all, let's remember, like, that it's become normalized in our world now. But I know I use the word normalized a lot, but when it first started, it was very scary because we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know who was going to die. A lot of people died during that time. Right. So you don't know. Okay. So even I don't want to leave out of the house because now I'm going to contaminate everybody in the house. Like, there's a lot going on. It was very stressful. Again, if you were having communication issues and now I got to be with you all the time, like we got to see each other morning, noon, and night. Right. And so, so that is, I think, part of, I'm sure there's always underlying issues and challenges and things that people haven't addressed, but it's like there was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. And you all remember, I don't know if y'all remember this. To me, for us as a ministry, we were online hours at a time. Like, because we were going live like this. We were having marriage groups online. We
Mhm.
were counseling people online.
Well, if you were communicating with anybody, you were
Yeah,
online.
yeah,
There
yeah.
was no other way.
Exactly. And then doing all your family stuff,
Yeah.
like seeing family members online. So
Mhm.
it was a lot. It was
Mhm.
a lot.
The
So,
interesting
so
thing for me is
would you say?
the interesting thing is I never got a chance to experience that. I was still out in the field. I was
Mm,
still shaking hands, you
yeah.
know. So it was one of those things where everybody was talking about it. It's like I'm still leaving.
Yeah.
I'm leaving at 6:30 in the morning and returning back
Because he
now.
worked outside. So
Yeah.
it was like, okay.
But oh, go ahead.
But I just was gonna say, I think to me, it's having the decision, right? Okay, now
Mhm.
we're stuck because you have change. What we're talking about is
Yeah,
change.
that's exactly what we're talking about. Change.
It
Yes.
takes
Yes.
pressure on you, right? But when
Mm-hmm.
pressure hits, you have to make decisions, right?
Yes.
But I
Yes.
think with marriage, the hard part is because we see this all the time in counseling, you could have one spouse that's down to do the work. Let's have the hard conversations. Let's have the conversations. Let's do the work. Let's forgive. Let's whatever. And then you have another person that's like, that's good for you, but I don't
Yeah.
want to. I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One of the
So
things.
what if the person is saying, I don't want to talk about it, and all y'all got is time? So what, you just walk around the house
Yeah, yes.
not talking to each
And that
other?
probably happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where I was going after Dennis finished, and that is they didn't have the skills to be in the same space all the time,
Mm-hmm.
because that takes open communication.
Mm-hmm.
It takes empathy.
Mm-hmm.
It takes these skill sets that hadn't been developed, that you didn't necessarily realize you hadn't developed, because you had other ways, other things to go do. You could go to work.
Yep.
You could go outside. You could go talk to other people.
People travel for work all the time.
Right.
So they were gone.
Yes, exactly. And those were escapes that you didn't even know that you had, or that you were using, until you were confined into the same room with that person. And now you're like, I don't like you, and I don't know how to empathize with you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know how to be patient with you.
Yeah.
I'll go a step further. Not only did the skills weren't developed, but I believe this, and this is kind of just over the years as I start to listen to people, they don't have values that they have in common with each other. Like when we get married, we don't really discuss what are our values together.
Yes.
And so sometimes if we do value this, we value this relationship, we value communication, then we'll take the maturity to build on the skills that we need to keep going closer together. And I felt like as I listen to people, it's just like we don't have any real values that we are aligned with, because in order to make the decisions, you need to have those values or what we're deciding on to do. But if you don't have aligned values, then you see drifting. You see people starting to kind of go separate ways because, well, I don't believe in this, because we know there's a lot of division we saw even with all that season that we was experiencing. Some people was talking about the mask, and some people didn't believe in the mask. So it was just a lot of division. So we didn't stick to the values that we really believed in.
And I think one of the biggest values as Christians, and it's kind of sad that we even have to say this, like when we're in counseling, we have to say to people, we're biblical counselors, so it's our duty to give you the word, because a lot of times people are kind of like pushing back on that now, right? But what I want to say is, like, to me as a Christian, I always look at it as like, we got saved, we say the salvation prayer, but we need to keep in mind that the salvation prayer has two parts. One is I'm asking for a savior, but another one is saying I'm surrendering my life to your leadership. And to me, that's a value. It's like, to me, if I am like, I want to know what God wants for me, I'm willing to go through some uncomfortableness to get where he wants me to go. I'm willing to follow his direction. That helps too. because dealing with these kind of skills and hard conversations, they're not comfortable. They're not fun. You know what I'm saying? So if you don't, who likes to be uncomfortable? You know what I mean? So if it's something that's, I just don't want to discuss, or maybe it's something that happened in my past, or we've seen where people have cheated and they're just like, I said, sorry, and you should accept my sorry and we should just move on. And the other spouse is like, but I'm hurting and that's not fair and we should talk about it. No, not really. I apologize. Right? Because the spouse who did the action, they don't want to talk about it. Right? So I think, to me, like he's saying, I think that's a good, like, looking at it from a value standpoint too. Like, what are our values as Christians? Like, do we want to hear God's point of view in it? Or do we don't want to deal with it? Yeah. I think knowing your values gives you an anchor.
Yeah.
Another piece, I think that one of the things that we don't understand when we first get married is that our spouse is not going to stay the same, and they shouldn't stay the same. Because if you're the same a year or 10 years from now that when you first got married, then there's no growth. And I mean, who wants a living thing that doesn't grow? Right? Like, that's probably not alive. It's probably going backwards. So that, I think, is in terms of talking about what do we do when our spouse changes. I think we expect, it's one of the parts that can help our marriages grow and mature together, because you're not going to be the same person.
Right.
And another piece I think we miss is that we're going to change, and our spouse is going to change. And a lot of times we expect our spouse to change in the way that we want them to change.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I do think that there, in some ways, people don't want their spouse to change. Like, there are certain things that they don't want their spouse to change, and then there are things that they do want their spouse to change over the course of the marriage, right? So whatever gets on my nerves, I want you to change. And whatever I think is good, I want to stay the same. Right? Yeah. And since we have talked for weeks about the evolution of a marriage, part of it is because people evolve. So maybe when you first got married, your wife was more compliant and she was less vocal, right? Then over time, as she starts to learn who she is, as she has some kids, maybe she, it starts to excel in her profession, or even just coming into her own, finding her voice, right? And then this person that used to be really quiet and soft-spoken, and who pretty much, was always agreeable with what you wanted and what you thought and what your ideas were, now she got an opinion. So what do you do?
That you hit the nail on the head. I like the words you use, agreeable, because even in the workplace, a lot of times, and this is a kind of a statistic in the workplace, where typically women are more agreeable in the workplace because they don't want to ruffle feathers, and things like that. It's a whole cultural thing, but that is the piece that in a marriage is very important, where whether you are agreeable or disagreeable, it's not good or bad, it's just what it is. For instance, when we had kids, in my mind, consciously or unconsciously, I don't know, Kendra was at home, right, with the kids, taking care of the kids. At some point, she was like, I don't want to do this anymore. This way. And for me, that's a big change. It's like, my expectation at the time was that, you're going to do that. You're going to take care of the kids, feed them, and make sure they stay alive and all that. And I'm going to go out, kill something, drag it home, and take care of that piece. At some point, that started to shift. And so I had to come to grips with that, with that change. And so we had to have some crucial conversations about that changing and how we were going to operate from that point forward. And one of the things she said to me was, I need some me time. I think is the way she, so I need some me time because I'm not just your wife and I'm not just their mother. And so I need some me time. And so we had that whole conversation. And during that time, she I think started running clubs and book clubs and just kind of started to find her own voice at that time. And I had to, come to grips with what was going on and be okay with that change happening in our marriage. So that's just a personal example.
What about you guys?
I'm just giggling because we had the same thing. Yeah. I begged to be a stay-at-home mom. I mean, I begged. I was like, please retire me. I stayed home and I was like, help, I can't do this no more. I just was like, I'm mom all day. My title never changes. I just like, I need some me time. I need
Yeah, I think we're so used to change that when change happens in a way that that pulls us out of comfort zone, it's not convenient, or we can't control it, then that starts to ruffle our feathers. I mean, the sun goes up and down. Change is happening all the time. Change is actually seems like it's more of a constant. But when we feel like it messes with our comfort zones, it messes with the convenience of life, or I can't control this situation and I go crazy. And then the change is telling you, okay, maybe I need to surrender. Maybe I need to sacrifice, or maybe I need to submit to this newness of everything. And I think a lot of times that's where a lot of us get messed up at, is that, okay, now it's going to be more discipline that I have to do. I don't want to sacrifice. I like this comfort that I'm in. I like them the way they were. I liked the way that, you was slim like this and now you've gained weight,
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Or if it's even personal, I'm thinking about myself. I've gained this weight and now I said I was going to never take medication, and now I got to take medication. And I'm like, it's something that, but if I would have sacrificed, surrendered, and submitted to diet or a lifestyle, I shouldn't say diet, but a lifestyle, maybe this change would have happened a little further down the road, and I'm being able to adjust with it.
Yeah. So you had to even your own, like you said, Dennis, it's like you're also dealing with things that are changing in you while you also having to deal with somebody else changing at the same time, and you have to navigate all of that at the same time, and that can be really, really hard to deal with.
It forces you to say, okay, I got to surrender with how I feel about this. Maybe I might have to sacrifice some of my time to learn what they're going through, like perimenopause, premenopause. So now I'm starting to step in. So maybe I need to learn that instead of being like, why you got the air condition down on 46?
No.
We know it ain't that cold. It wouldn't be working right now.
Frozen over.
No.
But you know what? That's also why we encourage people to, I know it's easy for us to say we got married very young, but I do, marriage is a decision you really want to take your time making, because you are going to go through so many transformations and changes in life together. And you want to marry somebody that is ready to go through all the changes with you, and someone that you want to be on this journey with. Because there's so many things you can't even anticipate also there that are going to happen. Like if you have a parent that has to come and live with you, or you have a niece or a nephew that needs to come and live with you, or if somebody has some type of something physical happen to their body, and now you also become a caregiver to your spouse. It's like when we're thinking about marriage, we got to think about all of what marriage involves, not just when you stand up on your wedding day.
And I think most people don't do that. You know what I mean? I would say even when we got married, we weren't thinking.
No, not at all.
And I think
what'd you say, Angie? I missed it.
No, I just said we weren't even thinking like that. We were, you know what I mean? We were just like, okay, we believe this is who God has for us. We're willing to make some adjustments. We're willing to do some things. but you don't know it until you get into it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You really, really don't know. I feel like there are some things in our lives that you just don't know till you get into it. And if you knew, you wouldn't have said yes. And this marriage is a grow up plan. It's a maturity plan, you know?
It really
Yeah,
is.
we was in Dallas. We was for our continuing education hours for counseling, and this one session we went to, and I'm going to read it to you guys.
Okay.
I thought it was really good, and so I had to take a picture of it. He says, "What was natural early on must be intentional later on."
That's good.
So the thought about each other, the
Mhm.
compliments, the
Mhm.
praise, the
Mhm.
touching, the quality time,
Mhm.
and even potential threats. Back when we was dating, we made time for all that type of stuff.
Mhm.
And now that we're going through changes,
Mm-hmm.
now we gotta be so intentional in what we're doing and in the quality of talking to each other. We gotta be very intentional. We gotta be very
Say the
intentional.
quote again. What was natural early on must be intentional
Later on.
later on.
What was natural early on must be intentional later on. You know, he says you thought about each other, you complimented each other, you praised each other in public, you touched
Oh,
each other,
good.
you spent quality time together, you eliminated potential threats. So, you
Ain't
know,
that the truth?
so you did that when we're dating, and
Mhm.
when change happens, we forget that, hey, we was resilient back then. We can be resilient now. It's just going to take a little more intentionality, a little more discipline.
And I think it's that decision of choosing each other all over again. Like I feel like even in my
That.
relationship, I feel like even in my relationship with God, there's been moments where I felt disappointed by God. There was moments I was pissy, or angry. And I had to choose God all over again. It's the same with our spouse. It's like I chose you and I'm going to choose you again, even though it's not perfect or it's not how I think it should be. I'm going to choose you again. And we're graced that God does that with us every day and every moment. And so it's choosing to do that again with our spouse, I think, is the key.
So I got a question for you guys. So when change offends you, how do you handle that? When change offends you, and I'm talking about more of the relationship, like,
Yeah, sure.
you used
Yeah.
to do this, but you don't do it no more. You used to open my doors. You used to do all these other types of things, and now, you're building a business, or you're doing this, and you don't have the same energy, for me. Or let's say change has happened, and now we're not making as much money as we used to. This happened, and we used to go on vacations all the time. We was at the Caribbean every year, and now we don't do it. And I'm trying to figure out what's happening. How come you're not the man that you used to be over here, or how come you're not the woman that you used to be over here? What happens when you get offended with changes?
You want to go first? So
It can be.
I'm thinking, if you have something, go ahead.
I do, and I hope you don't. Can I share about the conversation we had about the difference in our sons'
I think so.
parenting? Parenting? Okay. So that was specific.
It's about to be live now.
No. So I was specifically thinking about an example. I was like, when has Daniel changed when I had a chance to be offended? And I think it's a conversation we've had recently. We have an older son and we have a younger son, and there's a 6-year gap between them. Our oldest son is very into sports. He's very athletic. He's also very disciplined. Like his personality, he's just a very disciplined person, And because they bonded over sports, Daniel very active. He took him to trainings, all his camps. I mean, everything. He was seeking out trainers for him, trying to help him reach this goal that he had for himself. And just spending a lot of time, went on like sporting events with Dennis and your son, and like, so he was very intentional about being very vocal and active in his life, our oldest son's life, right? With our youngest son, I feel like he's taken a back seat, and he's like because they don't really bond over stuff like that. And I think we just tired. I think that's part of it too. We just tired. We not the same parents that parented the other kid, right? And so what I have done, I have been very offended because I'm like, I don't want to lose our youngest because I feel like I wish he was more like he was with the older one. And so I just told him, you know,
Mhm.
I wasn't mean or rude about it, was I?
No.
Okay. I wasn't mean or rude about it. And I didn't make it a judgment about him as a dad. I just was like, I don't want to lose our youngest, you know, and he is a great kid. So it's not necessarily that there's anything that is like, I'm not seeing any signs of anything, but also just later on down the line, who knows, right? So I would say that's one of
Okay.
the examples. And so what I've done is I just tell him how I'm feeling and we talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's the key to
Mhm.
because we're both navigating such a change, right?
Mhm.
And each kid is different, and each kid needs something different.
Yes.
And so in my mind, right? So we've had this conversation, and I've expressed this to Kendra, is that in my mind, the younger one doesn't need what the older one got.
Mhm.
Plus, the younger one has both the older one and his dad in his life. You know,
Mhm.
so and he has very different
Interest.
interests,
Yeah.
very different interests. I mean, for instance, the older one liked video games too, but the younger one, that's where he spends a lot of his time because he doesn't spend his time in the gym, right? So he spends his time video games, talking to friends,
He
and
actually
this
do
is
spend time in the gym
right.
right
So
after
working
school.
out, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And but he has, and Jonathan and I have talked about, hey man, let's go work out together. And he pretty much says, hey, I already got my workout partners. Right? So, you know, so I don't encroach on that. Right? If you said, hey, Dad, yeah, come to the gym with me, let's go, then I'm there, right? I'm in the gym just as much as he is, but at different times. And he has, 2, 3, 4 workout partners that he's in the gym with just about every day. So it's a different dynamic with my younger one than it is with my older one. And I have my ways of being involved with him. But Kendra has her view on how she sees that relationship versus the other one. And I think we just have to keep communicating our feelings and desires. Because I think about like in a team environment, like when I was in corporate America, we talked, especially in the way that we work today, inspect and adapt, right? So you got a plan, but just because you created this big plan, you can't just put it on the shelf and then just go execute, because you run into obstacles, you run into things that cause you to have to shift. And so if you're not always inspecting and making the adaptation, then you're going to end up in a place that you didn't expect to end up. And I think that's what we as parents, we as spouses have to continue to do as we move through life, because we're changing. And like she said, we're not the same parents we were 5 years ago.
Right. Definitely.
Right? The other ones were in the house.
I think that's such a good point you said, Daniel, because I was thinking when you were saying that, I was thinking of my own work experience, right? Like it's literally what you said. Like we plan something, this is the initiative, this is what we want to do, we're going to go do it. Okay. And then we start hitting all these roadblocks or issues, or people on the team get removed who are a key part of the plan or whatever. And it's like, okay, so what's plan B? You know what I'm saying? Okay, so what we doing now, right? And then other people are like, oh, well, let's just stop. No, we can't stop. It's like if somebody has to be like, no, like we need to keep moving. Like we have to do this, right? And then if you don't do that, then you don't see the growth that's needed in your team, in the projects, all of that. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, like, how much is that like marriage kind of? Like, okay, we got married, we had a plan, and then we start hitting roadblocks,
Come on,
issues and circumstances. And somebody's like, well, I'm just going to stop. I just don't want to do this no more. And somebody else like, no, come on. But it takes like the whole team saying, yeah, let's do this for us to have continual movement to get to the place where we're like, oh my gosh, we made it. Like we did it. And I just thought that was such a good example, because I was like, oh my gosh, that is marriage. It really is, because you're gonna hit roadblocks, and it could be roadblocks that have nothing, like what you guys just talked about. That's your kids. You guys' marriage is this. I always say kids are on the outside of that circle, right? So now you guys have to talk and be intentional to keep you guys like this versus going like this. Because we had the same thing. We had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago about years ago when stuff happened with our oldest, and how I felt about it and how he felt about it. We had to have a really honest conversation about it, because similar, I was like, I felt like you should have did A, B, and C, and I didn't feel like you did it, right? And he was like, well, that wasn't my heart, but that's how you viewed it, right? So we had to have a really good conversation about that. But I think that's the key, is kind of being able to see. I think with work, you get a paycheck. So it's like, I really don't feel like doing this, but I'm going to get paid, right? And so it's kind of like, well, what is the reward in marriage, that keeps us
and how we are as parents, it does impact, like, how you are as a parent impacts how your spouse views you as a person, right? And so that's one of the big changes that we all have experienced, at least, the four of us have experienced, is that once you start having kids, that has impacted how you are viewing this other person, right? Because I mean, I'm y'all the counselors, so your family of origin, right? It has tremendous influence on how you are now showing up in your marriage.
It does. It really does.
Kids are a big trigger, and they are a big trigger. And I think it is like having those conversations. Like I think I said the last session, he was like, when it came to our kids, he was like, you're making this about you. You know what I mean? You're personalizing it because you're afraid, like, what if this doesn't work out? Are they going to be in counseling like I was in? Are they going to have this experience happen like what I had happen? Are we going to, lose contact because of the way we're handling this? And so I had to take a seat back and be like, you're right. I am making this about myself because I'm afraid. I'm afraid. So I am making this about myself,
Yeah.
And that's good that he said that Dennis said that.
No, for real, it was.
You are making this about you, because I mean, you could get offended by him saying that.
I did.
She did.
I did. And it took me, I think he might have said it to me 2 times before I was like, because to me, once again, I think it's easier in a workplace because there is a paycheck involved with it. But when it comes to your relationships, there's so much personal, I guess, growth or personal things that you have to do. Like in that moment, I had to literally say, okay, I need to stop being mad because, well, this is what I say in our marriage to kind of help me stay humble, is he will say something. And if I don't agree with it, I will ask myself, I'll say to myself, Angie, you could be wrong. You actually could be wrong. Even though you feel very strong about this and you feel like this is the right way, you could be wrong. And so to me, that always helps me to be like, let me be willing to listen and let me deal with my heart. Because if I stay offended, I'm not listening. I'm not listening.
And I think for us, we have to realize that we're friends too. And so I feel like sometimes I can be direct like that because this is my friend that I'm talking to,
The screen got smaller.
Yeah.
You gotta get closer.
So this is my friend.
I just like it. We can see the faces. I'm listening. We listen to Dennis.
This is my closest friend. So
yes.
I feel it's a safe place, because if I can't express myself, and if I got something that I feel not necessarily maybe in my head or maybe in my heart, and if I can't express it, it makes it really difficult. And so as my friend, sometimes I'm looking at my friend struggle, but also I'm looking at my wife who's looking at me. And don't see the other side, because I'm living it just as much as she's living it.
Yeah.
But I see it different. And I think we live in a culture where you have to agree with me. You have to agree. Sometimes I believe that you don't have to agree all the time. Sometimes it gives a great level of perspective, having different points of views.
Yeah.
And so for me, I had to say how I felt.
That's why I said marriage is a grow up plan, because in that moment I was offended and I was like, what do you mean I'm making it about me? Because in my mind, I'm thinking about my kids. What you mean I'm making it about me? And that's how I responded. And then like I had to like chill out and be like, let me think about what he said. Is there some truth to what he said? And then I was like, oh, there is some definite truth to what he said. But once I surrendered to it and submitted to it, then I was able to make the adjustments. You know what I mean? Like meaning like, okay, let me go to God. And now I have to talk to God, because I'm like, at the end of the day, what's really going on is I'm super freaked out. Like I'm just freaked out because I don't know which way this is going to go. And it doesn't seem like it's going in the right way. So yeah. Once again, going back to choosing each other again, because it's like, we're not on the same page. How do we get on the same page with this? Mm-hmm. And the one thing I'll say too is I learned this some years ago, going through some stuff with some friends, not even him, but the person I was dealing with had a lot of trauma they were dealing with. And what I came to the conclusion is it's a hard thing for me to ask you to choose me over your self-protection. And I think in marriage a lot, that's what we're seeing as well. Because in order for it to work, I got to put down my rocks. I got to put down what I think is going to protect me and keep me comfortable in order to choose us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, we have our hands up like this when we should be like this.
Yeah. You know? Yes. But if I do this, I'm taking the chance I may get hurt. And for most folks, that's
you left yourself wide open.
For most folks, that's like, I ain't trying to do that because I don't know if I can trust what you're gonna do. So I'm, or I'm gonna be like this, or I'm bracing myself. So yeah.
I think that's where we have to be healed from speck-itis in marriage. Because the scripture that says, we see the speck in our brother's eye, but we don't see the beam in our own eye. Mm-hmm. And I think this goes to what Jesus told the folks that brought the woman that was in adultery, mm-hmm. and say, hey, this woman is committing. We caught her in the act. She committed adultery. What you gonna say? And he said, whichever one of y'all is without fault, mm-hmm. be the first to cast the first stone, and all of them left. And I think in marriage, like Dennis said, we have to be okay with and being on the same page doesn't mean that we agree on everything. And I think being able to not agree on everything and still walk in love in our marriage is a win, mm-hmm. day in and day out, because we are choosing to choose our spouse, not because they agree with us, not because they see it our way, but because they are just doing that out of choosing us, and we're choosing them, regardless of the circumstances or how we feel, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what God does for us. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We a lot of times have some jacked up ways or jacked up ideas that don't align with what God has, asked us to do. And mm-hmm. He's choosing us every single day. And so in order for us to kind of walk in our marriages, we have to do the same thing. And we're always going through transition. Every spouse, every day is growing or changing or shifting. And that causes us to have to change and shift with them. Our ideas have to change and shift, and we have to stay in constant communication in order to understand what they're going through. Mm-hmm. Right?
I'm gonna read this scripture real quick because it's one of the scriptures I have been meditating on this week, and so it's 1 John 4:20-21. And it says, if anyone boasts, I love God. This is in the Message Bible. It says, if anyone boasts, I love God, and goes right on hating his brother or sister, thinking nothing of it, he is a liar. If he won't love the person he can see, how can he love the God he can't see? The command we have from Christ is blunt. Loving God involves loving people. You got to love both.
Mhm.
And I know that's kind of a slap around verse, but I like it because it's just straight to the point. It's like, I mean, we can say we love God, but how well are we doing with loving our spouse or loving our friends or loving people who have hurt us and offended us? And love is just not easy. It's not this ooey gooey. I always say, like, between like Disney and Tyler Perry movies, it done got us all jacked up. We think it's like, because Tyler Perry movies get me. Like, some man in a really bad wig gonna show up and he gonna love you, girl, with all your faults, your crazy baby daddy, your abusive baby daddy, right? You know, all your debt, your 3-4 kids, and he just going, I just love you and I'm gonna be here. And yeah, that could happen, but then you have to start the work. And that's when real love,
Mhm.
because what you've been dealing with is attraction. Real love is this is it right here. And I always feel like, what is the greatest example of real love? It's the cross. And that was very painful. I wasn't there, but it sounds like it was excruciating. You know, it sounds horrific, but he did it because he loves us. And there are moments with our spouses, if we will surrender what we think is right, or we're willing to go through some pain, or we're willing to sacrifice something, we'll get on the other side and see the amazing reward. For Christ, the reward was us, you know, and seeing us coming back to him. That was the reward. For us, it could be the healing of our marriage. It could be the healing of our childhood. It could be the healing of spechitis. It could be there's all kinds of rewards that God has for us if we will press through the pain that we don't want to deal with, or the uncomfortableness, or I've been meditating on dying to self a lot this couple of weeks. So I'm like, dying to self is rough. And I think that's what it is in marriage. It's a death to what I want.
Yeah.
And that's not easy peasy.
Yeah, and people don't want to hear that in the chat GPT, world. They want to hear, microwave society. We want to get things done over with quick because we're big on convenience. We're big on our comforts. We live here in America. We don't know what it's like. I was just thinking about this when I went to another country earlier this year. Just some of the things that they don't have that we do have. I mean, you look at the grocery stores, how much
they're so small,
how much variety we have. And so we get comfortable in that. And so you put us in a different spot, you put us and change that stuff. And then it's like, either you're going to adapt or you're going to
wild out.
You're going to have
like,
some
I ain't
problems.
got Costco no more. You're going to wild out. Yeah.
And so I feel like it's one of the best things that can happen in your life to have a perspective of change. And once you accept change, you'll be okay. You'll be all right.
Yeah. And that goes back to, let me pull this up real quick. So when we met last time, that was the 5 things. It says, how can you go through a change with a spouse? And the number 1 thing was accept the change. That change is happening. And I think, like you and Daniel said, like, change is here. It's just because, like, you made a good point. The weather's different every day. Sometimes the wind blows, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, we have change every day. It's just really, how do we deal with the change that's uncomfortable? So accepting change, then what you guys just talked about, Tillman's, 2, communicate how you're feeling about the season, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then 3 was be consistent. But it was talking about, like, be consistent in the things, like, have you made a decision to praise your spouse during this hard season? Did you make a choice to encourage your spouse? I kind of looked at it as, like, a lot of times I need the anchor for my soul. I need scriptures. I need time with God. I need prayer time. And the more consistent I'm in that, it helps me go through seasons of change. The 4th thing was understand what has changed and be honest about what has changed. Because I think sometimes people don't even want to do that piece, right? Like, my spouse has changed, but more even deeper, our relationship has changed. And maybe I don't want to talk about that. Maybe I'm in denial. And then the fifth thing was consider getting some help. So counseling, coaches, friends, etc. But I think that's
Or living well.
yeah, the living well community. So I think it starts though with accepting change. That's
Absolutely.
I'm gonna drop those 5 points in the chat right here. So for people to go back and get those later, just in case they missed any of them.
Yeah, to piggyback on your points there, Angie, seeing change as positive versus not accepting it and expecting it and seeing it as a positive thing. Because if your spouse is changing, you're also having to change. So the relationship is changing, right? Growing. So my hope is that, or any relationship, our hope is that our spouse is growing. And so if they're growing, then we're growing. If I'm growing, then we're growing. And that is the expectation. I think that the mindset that we should think about and have in our marriages is that we expect growth, and growth is change, is positive change. Let's expect it. Let's go after it. Let's support each other with that.
Yeah, and see the reward in it. Let me read this real quick. This is from an article from watermark.org. I'll make it really, really quick. It says one of the most rewarding and challenging aspects of marriage is to consider that you have a sacred opportunity. In his book, The Meaning of Marriage, Tim Keller says, within the Christian version of marriage, here's what it means to fall in love. It is to look at another person and get a glimpse of what God is creating and say, I see who God is making you, and it excites me. I want to be a part of that. I want to partner with you and God in the journey you are taking to his throne. And when we get there, I will look at your magnificence and say, I always knew you could be like this. I got a glimpse of it on earth, but now look at you. And it says the chance to help the one closest to you become more like Christ is a sacred opportunity.
Really good. That's really good.
Really nice.
That's a nice perspective shift too.
And
you look
perspective. You look in the Old Testament. I think it's Malachi chapter 3. I don't remember the verse, but it talks about how God does not change. God changes not. And then you look at something in the New Testament where it talks about Jesus the same today, yesterday, and forevermore. And so we know that that's the constant that we have, and that's what that's our value. That's the value. That's not going to change. That's the constant that's going to be. So we ask ourselves, what can we, if we know God is not changing, the word is not going to change, what are the consistencies that we need in our life in order to, maintain or be intentional and keep things going? Because it's always easier said than done. What we're saying is, it sounds, it's like, well, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't understand. And you might be correct. We don't understand. We may not feel what you're going through. But what we do know from the experience of knowing that God doesn't change and knowing that Jesus is the same today, yesterday, and forevermore, God is faithful. And he can come into a situation and give you such a perspective that you saw this as a negative, but it was actually a positive because you grew from this. You became somebody different that you needed to come. God gave you an opportunity to become somebody different than what you was. For the season that you're going through. You can't be the same person in this particular season. You need to have some different armor on. You just can't have this same type of mentality. You have to grow out of it. Just like when we were little kids, just like when we were teenagers, and just like we're adults. There's seasons that we have to grow out of in order to become what God wants us to become.
And if we let him too, it's another season also to get to know God in a way we've never known him before, because we've never been here before. That's how I look at it too. Like, hey, I get to know God. My faith gets to grow. I never been here before. I get to have more intimacy with God. Why? Because I'm going through some hard mess. And I need a greater strength that I can't get by myself,
and a prayer to go along with what you said, Angie, where in that article, it talked about you getting a front row seat to where God is taking your spouse. Sometimes we are watching and it's hard to watch because it's not what we expect. It's not the path that we would have taken. And so for a prayer for us as spouses who's seeing our spouse go through and make changes that we don't understand is, God, help us to see our spouse the way you see them.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen. Amen. That's real.
Amen.
That's good.
Well, I think this has been an excellent conversation. I think that whenever people watch it on the replay, it is going to minister to them. And yeah, I think there's a lot to take away from this conversation. What's something you taken away from our conversation?
I think I'll just end with what I just said, because that came to me as Angie was talking about, the article, and how we are partners with God as we, watch him change our spouse or take our spouse to where he is desiring them to be in his purpose and all of that. And sometimes we don't see the route. We don't see the avenue, or we don't see the outcomes that we're expecting. Just like we do with our kids, right?
Yeah, that's exactly
that front
what I
row
was
seat
thinking.
And we're like, Lord, this ain't what I desired.
I don't want the front row seat no more.
With our spouse, we have to have the front row seat, right? And so to pray and ask God to allow us to see our spouse through the transition as he sees them.
Amen. Dennis, what's your takeaway?
I go back to the quote that I said earlier is, what you did early on, you got to be it was natural early on. You got to be very intentional later on. And change is going to happen. And so you just got to prepare yourself and be intentional. It's just like anything else we're doing. If you're going to the next level on something, you got to prepare for it and get yourself ready. And so you just got to be intentional. I got to be intentional, waking up early, all this stuff. So the same thing that change is going to happen in your marriage. So now it's a greater level of discipline and intentionality that comes along with it.
Yeah. For me, I would say it's a perspective change. I think this conversation helped me to really see it's a change of perspective, because even, we're supposed to faith it's not looking at the things we see, you know what I mean? But if we're looking at our spouse, we're looking at what we see. And even with counseling, we've been just dealing with a lot of people with unforgiveness and different things. And it's hard for people because they want to see the person pay. But there's a certain level of faith that's needed in God's process that he is dealing with that person. And so it's believing and trusting, just like the farmer puts the seed in the ground and he's trusting the process. It is trusting that God knows what he's doing, even though I want my spouse to do this. Or I think our finances should look like this. Or I think this should be like this. It's like, you know what? It's an opportunity for me to shift how I'm looking at my marriage or my spouse. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting for that, faith can be my title deed. Faith can be the substance of things that I'm hoping for until I see it in the natural. So for me, it was perspective.
Yeah, I think my takeaway is how much of a journey it is, to be in a marriage. Like you really do live a lot of lives together, as they say. There's so much in terms of how you think, and things that used to bother you that don't bother you anymore. And it really can change you in a good way if you let it, and if you embrace it. And like Dennis said, like towards the very beginning of our time, if you surrender, instead of holding on so tight and trying to stay in control of everything, if you just kind of like put your hands up and enjoy the ride and the process, I think it makes it a whole lot easier. So or enjoyable. I ain't gonna say easier.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I go through hard seasons. God always says to me, you need to learn how to enjoy the process. And I used to hate when he said that, because I was like, ugh. But now it's like, I know what that means. It's like, dig deeper with me, because that's how you're going to enjoy this process. You ain't going to get it from him, and you ain't going to get it from them. You're going to have to dig deeper with me in order to enjoy this season.
All right, y'all. Well, we are so thankful to have you all with us. Like, whenever you watch this, my husband likes for you to type replay whenever you're watching this. It just lets us know that this is meaningful to you and enjoyable. We're going to be back next week regardless. So this is something we're doing now, Marriage Mondays. So if there's a topic that you want us to cover, please drop it in the chat. Let us know. You can private message us on Instagram at Living Well Marriage. You can private message us on Facebook at Living Well Marriage. If you want to share privately and you don't want to share it directly in the comments, but don't worry about it. Just if you have a question or something, you're like, you know what, I would love for y'all to discuss this, and you're gonna grab your spouse and y'all gonna sit together and we're gonna talk about it here. We'll go first. The four of us will go first, and then y'all can go and have a conversation afterwards about it. So, but we hope also we have an event coming up on December the 14th. Amazing event. It's the ticker is scrolling across the bottom of your screen. You can go and take a look at all the details for that. Our early bird registration ends in we're almost right under 3 days. So on the 31st of October at 11:59 p.m., the early bird pricing will end.
3 days, y'all.
Yep.
3 days.
So go ahead and get your tickets. You will not regret it. We're gonna have a great time. So, all right, y'all. Until we meet the next time.
Yes, we'll see you next time. The Bullocks and the Tillmans. We're out.
We out. Good night.
Peace.
Good night.
Bye, y'all.